Once again, thank you everyone for joining me today for today's webinar, Cyber Risk Assessments Roadmap for Protecting Your Business and Reputation. I'm your host, Nick Stevens, CEO and co-founder of Heroic Technologies. I'm a cybersecurity evangelist and also co-author of a best-selling book, Managing Your Business Risk in the Cybersecurity Minefield. So why are you here? As I'm sure you're aware, things are changing and cyber attacks are way up. Cybercrime cost the world economy $10 trillion in 2023, making it the third largest economy after the US and China. The big difference is cybercrime is growing at an average of 15% year over year, something both the US and China would be envious of. And also, you're probably a part of an organization or a business based in the Western US, most likely with a presence in the San Francisco Bay Area or Portland metro area. And you've heard about all these cyber attacks on the news and want to make sure that your organization is protected. You may even have someone managing your IT, or you may have a cyber insurance policy, but you're not quite sure if that's enough. So hopefully we'll help you understand what you need to do to help better protect your business. So that's really the mission today, is provide information and ideas you can take back to your organization on better protecting yourself from cyber risks. So who are we? Heroic Technologies is a security-first managed IT compliance and cybersecurity firm. Our mission is really to empower our clients' productivity while minimizing their risk. So we're constantly focusing on both IT and cybersecurity education. Just as many professionals spend a lot of their time on continuing education so they can keep their abilities up to date and ensure that they are aware of all the changes in their field, we're constantly training and studying the tactics used by cyber criminals and the changes in different compliance laws so we understand how businesses can best protect themselves. For today's agenda, we'll cover what a cyber risk assessment is and why your organization needs one, typical timelines and what to expect in the process, and then what's the very next step to making sure that your business is covered to help mitigate your cyber risk. So why listen? As I mentioned before, things are changing and attacks are way up, especially for businesses. Businesses are really a prime target because the end goal, when you think about it, of a cyber attack is financial gain. And businesses will always have more money than an average individual. So that's something to never really forget, is cybercrime is driven by one thing, money. The criminals are trying to take money or make money however they can. Some statistics that kind of show how attacks are increasing and how much they're costing organizations. In 2023, the average cost of a breach increased to 4.45 million, so almost $4.5 million. 18% of the breached organizations, so almost 1 in 5, also had substantial fines as a result of the breach. So this means this is regulatory agencies, they're levying fines against these organizations on top of the breach costs. Ransomware payouts increased from a little over 800,000 to 1.4 million between 22 and 2023. And some other interesting tidbits are educational institutions are currently averaging 2,500 cyber attacks a week as of 2023, and half of all of internet traffic right now is from malicious bots. Imagine that. Half of internet traffic coming from bots, many of which are malicious and used for cyber attacks. So why Heroic Technologies? Well, we've really focused our business on investing heavily into the best protection for our clients, as well as education and assisting with policy, procedure, and plan creation to make sure that clients really understand what risks are out there and are in the best position to be able to handle them and protect their business. We really want to focus on also being integral partners with our clients and positioning them to not only protect themselves, but leverage technology to help their business scale. So through that we really offer a proactive security approach through our team of highly skilled, seasoned professionals who live and breathe IT and security. So now let's move on to the main topic of our call today: a cybersecurity or cyber risk assessment. So it's really an essential tool for identifying and addressing potential vulnerabilities in the organization. By conducting a risk assessment, you can essentially protect your organization from threats such as data breaches, ransomware attacks, and other forms of cybercrime. So let's cover a few areas of the assessment. So first, and what it helps do. So first, identify and prioritize risks. So this is a key portion of the assessment. It's really to help you identify those potential vulnerabilities and threats that can compromise your businesses or organization's data and systems. If you can identify these, you can then prioritize the risks and focus resources on making sure that the most pressing issues are are taken care of and are mitigated. Another way to think about it is organizations have hundreds of vulnerabilities, and a hacker only really needs one that is exploitable to breach that organization. So really, if you're not constantly making a point, at least on an annual basis, to look for those vulnerabilities and risks, somebody else is. Unfortunately, that somebody is going to be a hacker. Also, you want a cyber risk assessment helps with protecting assets. So risks can have serious consequences, including financial losses, reputation damage, and legal liabilities. A risk assessment helps understand the impacts of these risks, so you can really take those steps, as discussed before, to prevent them from occurring. So nobody wants downtime. Downtime not only stops you from doing business, but depending on what type of organization you are, it can also have a pretty heavy impact on your reputation. Additionally, risk assessments help you with compliance. And there's a lot of different legal and regulations that require compliance. It could be HIPAA for medical, PCI if you're dealing with credit cards, or FTC safeguards if you're doing consumer-based financial transactions. All of these have different obligations. Many of them require that you have at least annual cyber risk assessments. And those again help avoid costly downtime and improve the efficiency of the organization, because there's nothing less efficient than having your entire network down and none of your employees being able to work, which is often the case with a cyber attack. So let's take a look at the framework of a cyber risk assessment. The assessment really has 4 parts. So first, it's really looking at the people and how are you currently protecting the people? Without the people, an organization can't really function. People are really the first line of defense, and the ones typically targeted in most cyber attacks. We're also going to take a look at the processes. What processes within the organization are required for growth and success? What if those are targeted? What if those are stopped? Are any of those processes vulnerable and perhaps require adjustment? Additionally, we'll take a look at the technology. Is the technology itself secure? Is it resilient? Do you have a way, if technology is taken down, to restore? And lastly, the data. This is often where the value and the end goal or target of attack is. Is the data properly protected? So let's start with part 1, protecting the people. I often say that an organization's number 1 vulnerability is the people, not because they don't care, but because they're trying to get their job done. And the cyber criminals know your employees are busy. Your employees are just trying to do their best, and the criminals take advantage of that through social engineering. As a result, people aren't only number 1 asset, but in this current cyber landscape, they're unfortunately the number 1 vulnerability. And your employees are and will continue to be targeted. This reminds me of a story of a law firm's HR administrator who was specifically targeted by hackers. This administrator received a very convincing spoofed email that looked like it came from one of the partners at the law firm. Had the partner's email signature and looked identical to one of the legitimate emails that they might otherwise receive from that partner. That email requested that the HR team change the bank for direct deposit for that partner or attorney, basically saying, I've changed my personal bank. Can you send my direct deposits to this new bank? This wasn't, it's not an uncommon request for HR to receive. So HR team went ahead and followed that request. A month later, that attorney or partner reached out as they hadn't received their last distribution or payment, which as an attorney was pretty large, over $50,000. It was found that that money had been wired to a cyber criminal's accounts. Unfortunately, but not unexpectedly, this was devastating to the HR administrator. Years later, when they told me this story, it was obvious that it was still really embarrassing and painful for them to discuss. Furthermore, this increased the firm's cyber liability policy costs for when they had to get new insurance policies, as they'd already been a victim and shown that they would fall for these types of attacks. So I want you to think about that. Put yourself in the shoes of an employee that's accidentally let a hacker into a business systems. Not only is there the cyber impact, whether it's financial, but there's also a human element, guilt, potential loss of employment, potentially loss of employment for multiple people, depending on how bad that attack is. This is something that's kind of often overlooked. So we really want to focus on how we protect the people. And it first starts with cybersecurity awareness and increasing the level of awareness among your team. So has your team received security training? Is there anyone who did poorly? Who's most likely to fall victim to a phishing email? Who potentially has poor password hygiene? Is most likely to have their password stolen? One thing that we have often noticed in this area of cybersecurity awareness training is that organizations maybe have some training in place, say simulated phishing campaigns, where they send out simulated phishing emails to their employees. And this is great, but often this is all that's done. What happens if the employees never even look at the email? Do you consider them trained, security aware? Sometimes people are just busy. If it doesn't look like it's an interesting email, they may just not read it. So phishing simulations are only a single piece of what should be a broader security awareness training program. You really have to include things like quizzes or some assessment to actually test the knowledge of the employees, because over 90% of breaches are going to start with email that are targeting individuals, the people in your company. And 60% involve compromised employee passwords. So the people are the target as far as how to get the foot in the door when it comes to cyber criminals trying to perform a cyber attack or a breach. Next, we want to focus on protecting the processes. Financial processes such as invoices and payments are pretty common targets. So another example that I have is a building developer that fell victim to financial fraud after one of their vendors was the victim of a business email compromise. So think about that. So this building developer themselves, they actually had not been fallen for a business email compromise. It was one of their vendors who did. And once the vendor's email had been hacked, the hackers just kind of waited for the right time. And that right time was when a large invoice was sent from that vendor to the building developer. Once they saw that email go out, they quickly sent out a new email from the breached account and said, oh, by the way, we've changed banks. Please remit payment for this invoice to our new bank. Now, the catch is that email came from a legitimate email account at the vendor's company. So when the building developer's accounting team saw the request, they did as you're supposed to. They looked at the email and they said, this is a legitimate email. This came from the proper email address. What they didn't do is have a second way to authenticate a major change like this. And that's where their process itself was vulnerable and flawed. They didn't have a way to, or a policy in place to go ahead and pick up the phone and call a known number for that vendor to make sure, hey, have you actually changed your bank accounts? We received a request to wire money, a large sum of money to a new account. Can you confirm this was legitimate? Unfortunately, since that process was not in place, they went ahead and wired $80,000 to the wrong bank. So this really goes back to, protecting the people to some extent, having a process in place, that should have checks and balances. These processes can be vulnerable, especially financial processes. You want to make sure that you have a phone number for each vendor that you do wire transfers for, or organization that you do wire transfers with, and make sure that if there is a change request, you already have a phone number on file and a contact, a person that you can talk to, that you can say, is this a legitimate request? So part of the cyber risk assessment is really reviewing an organization's processes and identifying what processes and procedures introduce new risk. Are there processes that should be adjusted to improve security and reduce the risk without potentially causing unnecessary time or effort with those adjustments? For example, when an employee retires or perhaps is terminated, how do you know they're fully locked out? Is there a detailed process for this? It's shocking how many organizations forget to close out certain accounts after an employee leaves that organization, and that employee potentially still has access to sensitive information. Also, we need to understand the resiliency of the policy or the processes that are critical to the firm's operations. So if a certain process goes down or is interrupted, what will happen? Say if you're a law firm and you have to get to important client documents, what happens if you can't access those documents? Say if you're an organization that requires time to be tracked because you're billing per hour, what happens if you can't track that time? That's all these are processes that are critical to the survival of these organizations, but what happens if they're disrupted? Is there a plan on how to recover? Is there a plan are there ways that these processes can be made more resilient? And are there policies in place to make sure that the processes are actually followed? So it's great to have a process or procedure in place, but if there's no policy to enforce it, it may not be followed. Additionally, the cyber risk assessments are really going to focus on protecting technology. Um, Technology obviously is critical for a modern business, whether we're using computers daily for email, or maybe you have a software-based phone system or a VoIP system. Maybe you have a document management system, accounting software. There's a lot of different technology that's used for organizations to do their day-to-day work. And the challenge is that these systems are constantly getting outdated and need to have updates applied, or they're constantly changing and new vulnerabilities are being introduced. And if those aren't monitored and taken care of, then that's another one of those hundreds of vulnerabilities that a hacker can potentially exploit. I mean, what would happen if your organization right now suffered a ransomware attack and everything was encrypted on all the PCs? Could you guys operate? Most businesses can't. And one of the major reasons is they don't have a plan. They don't have a clear understanding of what systems are critical and haven't spent the time making their technology resilient, making sure that there's actually a business continuity plan and processes in place. And these are some of the things that we're looking for to see if those exist. So this reminds me of a ransomware attack that happened in 2023 that started because of an unpatched vulnerability in an email system. Publicly facing email system, there was a patch, it just wasn't applied. The result was all that organization systems were fully encrypted. Many firms thrive on their cash flow, and this one was no different. They had to pay a ransom to decrypt their systems rather than risk an extended outage and possible data loss. The scary part is 70% of organizations that suffer a breach suffer a second attack within 24 months of the first breach. And to put salt on the wound, especially those that have professional reputation like law firms and accounting firms, you can lose up to 30% of your clients after experiencing a cyber breach. When people think of these types of professionals, they expect to be able to share their sensitive legal or financial information and feel confident that organization has put in the proper protections. But if a data breach causes them to lose that information to hackers, your clients are going to often lose trust. So cyber risk assessment really needs to review your organization's software applications and computer systems to identify vulnerabilities. Are the systems patched? Are they vulnerable or outdated? Do they need to be isolated if they are? If they're still a critical system, often you can isolate those systems so they're not so easily attacked. Also has to assess the resiliency of the software, hardware, and other systems. If the system is attacked directly, can it remain usable? If it goes offline, how long before it's restored? And how long before the organization can resume business? What policies and procedures help manage the technology? For example, what is the organization's incident response plan? What's the business continuity and disaster recovery plan? If you don't have a plan, the average cost of a breach will be 2.66 million more than an organization that has a plan. So it actually pays to put time and effort into preparing for this. Just like everything, you have to have a plan. And the fourth item that a cyber risk assessment covers is the data. Businesses often have sensitive information on people. This could be information on employees, such as medical information, their financial information, social security information, say like a W-2. If it's a law firm or an accounting practice, they may have other sensitive financial information or personal information like trust or estate information, or intellectual property that an organization has that is of huge value and huge financial implications if that information is leaked. The information is not only valuable to the business and the clients, but it's extremely valuable to the cyber criminals. Because remember, as I mentioned at the top of the hour, cyber criminals are looking for how they can monetize these cyber attacks. And if business data has value, they will find a way to monetize it. In fact, data is often becoming the source of what we're calling a double ransom. First, a cyber criminal comes in and they will encrypt all the data. So a business, say, would have to pay money to regain access to their information. I know what you're thinking, but maybe we have backups. Fortunately, more and more of these criminal organizations are targeting the backups, either deleting them or encrypting those as well. And the second part of the ransom that these organizations are doing is they're actually stealing the information. So not just encrypting it, but before they encrypt it, they're actually copying the data off of a company's network, sometimes terabytes and terabytes of data. And then they will demand an extra payment for this to be deleted. And if you don't give that payment, then they will sell that or share it on the dark web with others. Sometimes they'll share it publicly to try to humiliate an organization. The problem is there's no guarantee if you pay that ransom, that second ransom, that they will ever actually delete it. Your information is now in the hands of a cyber criminal. We really have, so to protect the data, we first have to understand what kind of data an organization has. And also, are there any specific laws that regulate the data that apply to the organization? I mean, these could be federal laws, state laws. Sometimes there's state privacy laws or industry specific laws and regulations, whether it's a medical or financial industry. Where is the data stored? How is it stored? Is it encrypted? This can also tie back to the regulations, as many regulations require encryption for certain types of data. What policies are in place to ensure the data is properly protected and managed? Are these reviewed? Are they enforced? One organization I spoke with last week actually fell victim to business email compromise, which I've talked about several times here. And for them, it was because they didn't have MFA on their email. Once the email was compromised, the hackers were able to find W-2 information on their employees. And this resulted in the hackers filing fraudulent tax returns for all the employees so they could essentially take any rebates, tax rebates from those employees. So now, not only is this organization having challenges as a result, but all of their employees are having personal financial issues as a result of this breach. So now that we've kind of covered the major parts of a cybersecurity risk assessment, let's take a look at how long it typically takes. When heroic technologies does an assessment, first we start off typically with an initial cyber strategy. So this is going to be about a 25-minute call, fairly brief, where we're really understanding basic information about the organization. Once we move forward with the full cyber risk assessment, that takes anywhere from 30 days, so say 4 weeks, up to maybe for a larger organization, it could take maybe up to 6, 7 weeks, depending on the complexity and if there's any other special requirements from that organization. As far as who needs to be involved, typically there's going to be an executive sponsor, someone who can help ensure on the organization side that things actually get done. So they'll help with identifying key staff members that are familiar with different critical firm processes. And these could be like finance, management, operations, host of different departments. Then typically you'd present our findings to the stakeholders. And it should be known that when this is done, it's really important that all stakeholders are present. Whether it's a single managing partner for an organization, multiple partners, an executive committee, want to make sure that everybody is in-house when the assessment findings are revealed. And it does sound uncomfortable, and it can be, but without all the stakeholders fully understanding the risk, you're really going to struggle to make any change and reduce the risk in an organization. Cybersecurity really requires for it to be effective, it really requires buy-in from the executive team. And without that buy-in, we've seen a lot of well-intended cybersecurity programs essentially fall flat. So where do you go? What are the next steps? First, whatever you do, I encourage everyone on this call to commit to performing a cyber risk assessment on your organization. Whether you do it in-house, you outsource it to someone else, make sure it's done. Why? If you have cyber liability insurance and you file a claim, one of the first things this insurance provider is going to do is to validate that you have the proper protections in place that align with what you said on your policy application. If you don't, they're often going to deny the claim for gross negligence. There's even a case where an insurance carrier sued the policyholder for fraud because the company said they had MFA in place, but actually didn't in all locations. Also, you may have contractual or legal obligations for cyber risk assessment. FTC safeguards, which applies to accounting firms that do personal tax returns, mortgage lenders, these actually require organizations to have annual cyber risk assessments. So make sure at a minimum that you're doing an assessment, and it should really be done annually. If you're comfortable with what I've talked about and you have an IT team, you can absolutely perform this in-house. But either way, I still recommend having a third party validate some of the findings. And this should be, the reason is you want to have an independent third party do this. And essentially have them double check the work. So you could partner with someone like Heroic Technologies to perform the assessment on your behalf, as we would be that independent third party, because there's nothing wrong with having a third party validate the current security. I mean, we do it ourselves. Yeah, that's correct. We have a third party validate our security every quarter to ensure we haven't missed or overlooked something. So even though we have a team of cybersecurity professionals, we're that dedicated to security that we have a third party evaluate our security every quarter. Now, if you decided to have an organization like Heroic Technologies work with you for a cyber risk assessment, you can rest assured that you're choosing a group of cybersecurity, compliance, and IT professionals that are really dedicated to making sure your organization is efficient, secure, and scalable. We may not be a fit for everyone, but our clients understand the threats out there and they value the protection of their revenue and take responsibility for securing their business alongside us. And they really understand that investing in cybersecurity is investing in their own business continuity because we want to be a partner, not just another vendor. So if a business just wants the bare minimum from whoever's the chiefest, that's fine, but perhaps we're not the best fit. So if you are interested and would like to discuss the cybersecurity risk assessment a bit more, you can schedule a cyber strategy call with us. No strings attached. Talk a little bit more about your organization, determine the best strategy for you to use and assess your cyber risk. If you want to go ahead and schedule that, you can go ahead and go to strategy.heroictech.com/intro and schedule a 25-minute call. Also, if you have signed up for this webinar and attended, we will also provide a free level 1 penetration test on 3 to 5 of your computers. So go ahead and sign up and just mention that you were on the call, that you were attended the webinar, and we'll make sure to go ahead and get you signed up for that free penetration test on 3 to 5 of your computers, which will help show some of the vulnerabilities that might be lurking on those systems right now. So that's the top of all the topics I have for today. So I really want to thank everybody for taking the time. Enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you so much.